Pronto? Allora, guarda, dopo le 5 avrò...
William Verres is sitting in a soft leather armchair in his living room, next to the fish tank. He is talking on the phone with a source who has sent him some photographs. Photographs of Caravaggio's Nativity with St. Francis and St. Lawrence. The painting Verres is trying to find to stay out of jail.
Ok, va bene. Dai. Ciao.
When he's finished on the phone, Verres shows me the photographs on his WhatsApp.
They're definitely the painting, aren't they? So we've got pictures here of the two saints.
Yes. But it seems to be that these are just sections of it, aren't they? Not. Yeah.
The pictures show two squares of the painting, which appears to have been folded. In one of them, you can see St. Francis of Assisi in his tattered monk's habit. In the other section of the painting, St. Lawrence peers over the baby Jesus in a magnificent golden robe. The source is cagey about the origin of the pictures.
How did he get hold of these?
It's rather opaque because he's saying that they were just fragments, but he didn't tell me where they were from. He only just sent them as a sort of a teaser, I would say.
Looking at them, it's hard to judge whether they're genuine. The quality isn't high enough. But at this point, Verres is desperate. He needs to follow any lead that turns up. He's back in London, licking his wounds after the fiasco of the Sigismondo, the painting he travelled to Italy to recover in the last episode, the painting that turned out to be a fake, merely a print on canvas. That failure damaged his credibility with the Italian authorities and has put his attempt to find the Caravaggio at risk. If Verres's Italian handlers think he's just a dupe, they could pull the plug on the whole thing. So he needs something to keep them interested. And the source of these photographs is worth listening to. I know, because I've met him. And to be honest, it was kind of terrifying. From Brazen and PRX, this is The Professor. I'm Simon Willis. Episode 4, The Fugitive.
If this signal is sounded, you should proceed to the nearest assembly station.
It's December 2022, and Verres and I are on a cross-channel ferry from Dover to Calais in France. We're on our way to meet the source of the Caravaggio photographs. He's another Italian. Verres' friend Angelo, the Sicilian go-between we met in episode 2, introduced them. I can't give you this new guy's real name, but let's call him Lorenzo. Today, the sea in the English Channel is flat calm, and the ride is smooth. The crossing to Calais takes about an hour and a half. When we dock, Verres and I head down to the car deck to collect our rental car. We're sharing the driving, and now it's my turn.
Remember what side of the road we're on. Yeah. So we go toute direction, we go towards Lille in any case.
After a calm crossing, it's now raining hard. And as we drive, the rain turns into sleet. You can hear it hammering on the windscreen as we talk about Lorenzo, the guy we're going to meet. Judging from what Verres tells me, he's a heavy character.
He was dealing in antiques as well as possibly providing arms to people and hiding people when people needed to be hidden from either the authorities or from other clans in Sicily. He would organise this. He did allude to the fact that when he was younger, he would have been a lot nastier and aggressive. So, for example...
So, a retired gun smuggler who protected mafia fugitives. Okay.
An interesting character with some intellectual pretense, understanding something about literature, poetry, art as well. So, cultured thug.
If this is supposed to reassure me, it doesn't work. We drive east from Calais into Belgium.
I think we have gone somehow wrong.
Along the way, we miss a few turns.
We get there eventually, yes.
But then, finally, we get the GPS working.
Please follow the E44 3 miles.
After 3 hours, we arrive at our destination, a dreary old coal mining town. It's nighttime, still raining hard, and the place is deserted. Our meeting point is a pizzeria housed in an old factory. When we arrive, our man is waiting for us. Lorenzo is in his 60s, short but stocky, and dressed in a sweatshirt and ripped jeans. His nose has clearly been broken at some point, and he's missing several teeth. On his arm is a young woman with blonde hair. She's in her early 20s, and he introduces her as his niece. If that's true, let's just say they have an unusually affectionate relationship. We don't talk about the Caravaggio right away. We're here to get to know each other. We eat steak and drink wine and make small talk for an hour or two. Where he grew up, how he likes tinkering with cars. And then, the following morning, Lorenzo comes to our hotel. And over breakfast, Verez begins to ask questions.
Mi hai chiesto tu, Billy.
Sì, è quello.
Dobbiamo cercare questo, con
Ma 5-6 anni fa o anche...
le chiavi?
Verez wants to know more about Lorenzo's connection to the painting. How he knows the people they both refer to as the key. People in the mafia who know what happened to the painting after it was stolen back in 1969. Are they where the photos came from? He still won't say.
Sì, le chiavi...
The key I've known since childhood. The important people, those I've known all my life. Relatives, friends.
And from these childhood friends, Lorenzo has learned certain facts about the Caravaggio. I had already heard about the mafia's attempts to sell the painting in the 1970s, from my sources in the Italian police. But Lorenzo takes the story much further forward in time.
La cosa è stata restaurata.
The painting was restored così,
Sì, quello pare.
near Naples.
Tra Roma e Napoli. A Caserta.
Lorenzo says that the Caravaggio was damaged during the theft, and then later in storage. So around 1980, the mafia had it restored in a town between Rome and Naples.
Perché quando l'hanno rubato, l'hanno tagliato con un coltello.
Because when they stole it, they cut it with a knife, and afterwards to transport it. Do you have a sheet of paper? So that I can show you. I'll explain why they had to restore it. So, this is the Caravaggio. They folded it like this, then like that, then like that, in 8 or 9 foldings.
E dopo,
And apparently there was something on top of it.
tutti i
behind
pieghi,
it.
erano tutti
And
pieghi.
all the
Then, Lorenzo moves the Caravaggio story on by another decade, into the 1990s. If any of this is true, we're now learning more than the police ever have.
But in the late 90s, it was moved from the province of Agrigento.
Verez is interpreting for Lorenzo. He says that in the 1990s, more than 20 years after the Caravaggio was stolen from the church in Palermo, it was moved to a Sicilian province called Agrigento on the island's south coast. Lorenzo says the mafia were trying to protect it from a crackdown on their operations by the Italian state. The one thing he won't say is who did any of this.
Io nome non ne
I don't give names, huh? They are the ones who have to make the deductions. Because of my position, I can name names.
Non vogliono.
Okay, so let's make a deduction. We're talking about the mafia in the early 1990s, during a period of all-out war between Cosa Nostra and the Italian government. And we're talking about attempts to protect a priceless stolen painting from the government's clutches. One name springs to mind, a man who was at the heart of the mafia's campaign of violence at that time, as well as its operations in the illicit art trade. Matteo Messina Denaro, otherwise known by his alias, Diabolic. Matteo Messina Denaro was born in 1962 into an old mafia family in western Sicily. The region his family controlled is famous for its ancient ruins. For Denaro, these old temples weren't just picturesque pieces of archaeology. They were a massive money-making opportunity.
Appreciating the value of things you find, archaeological pieces you find near your house, was part of mafia business, in the sense of stealing.
This is Anna Sergi. She's an Italian criminologist and an expert on the Sicilian mafia.
How can I sell this? It's not mine, it's the state, but I can steal it from the state, I can sell it and make money out of it. So it's a very basic transaction here. But that required becoming some sort of connoisseur, because otherwise you didn't know what and where you could sell things.
And that is what Denaro became. He ran teams of looters and grave robbers who pillaged these ancient sites and brought him their treasures. He then smuggled these objects out of the country with the help of a Sicilian who had grown up on Denaro's territory before becoming an art dealer in Switzerland.
The markup that they get by turning these objects and selling them in Switzerland is at least 100x.
That's Jason Felch, the author of Chasing Aphrodite, a book about the illegal art trade.
And we've known for years that the real people who profit in the illicit antiquities trade are not the looters who dig these things up and sell them to local or regional middlemen. It's the middlemen who can bring these objects to market and find end users in the Western art markets who want to buy these things.
Matteo Messina Denaro had become the mafia's chief middleman for stolen art. But profit was only one of his motives. By the early 1990s, Denaro had realized that he could use stolen art for another purpose too: blackmail.
In Florence, Italy, rubble is being cleared and art experts are hard at work 3 days after the car bombing of the famed Uffizi Gallery.
Just after midnight, on May 27, 1993, a Fiat packed with explosives blew up outside the Uffizi, tearing through the gallery's walls and killing 5 people.
Among the dead were an 8-year-old girl and a 9-month-old baby. The entire family of a security guard from the nearby Uffizi Gallery was killed.
Florentines awoke that morning to find smoke billowing from the museum's windows. Rubble filled the narrow streets and firemen lifted body bags from the wreckage.
The famous Uffizi, storehouse of some of the world's most famous art treasures, was damaged, as were some artworks. Among its collections are works by virtually every famous Italian and European artist.
The mafia's main aim was to weaponize Italy's cultural treasures. The bombing of the Uffizi, along with 2 more blasts at museums in Rome and Milan, was part of a coordinated mafia terror campaign.
What we have in the early 1990s is this frontal attack on the Italian state by Cosa Nostra.
This is Filia Allam, a British academic who has been studying the Italian mafia for 25 years.
In basically the space of 2 or 3 years, we have the murders of important politicians. We have the murder of important state representatives like Giovanni Falcone.
Remember Giovanni Falcone from episode 2? He was the top anti-mafia prosecutor who was assassinated by Cosa Nostra while he was driving in Palermo, along with his wife and 3 bodyguards. After Falcone's murder, the Italian government launched a huge crackdown on the mafia. More than 7,000 army troops were sent to Sicily. The police arrested several top bosses, and prosecutors opened a raft of new investigations into Cosa Nostra's links with business and politics to undermine their control of the country. In response, the mafia unleashed a savage counterattack. The museum bombings opened a new front in their war against the state, and this time their targets were not people, but paintings. Anna Sergi again.
So the Florence attack to the Uffizi, the Rome attack, the Milan attack, they were all art targets. Why do they choose art? Because that's the generation of mafiosi who knew that art is symbolic.
So back to Denaro. At that time, he was an up-and-coming mafioso, but even for a gangster, he was especially bloodthirsty. He once boasted that he filled an entire cemetery by himself. He murdered rivals, pregnant women, even children. Here's Filia Allam again.
He is part of the group that not only kidnaps a 12-year-old son of a state witness, but they hold him for 3 or 4 years, and then eventually the order will come through to murder this child and his body to be, decomposed or liquidated in acid.
Denaro wasn't just a simple killer. He was also one of the bosses who decided the mafia's grand strategy. According to mafia informants, it was Denaro who came up with the idea of cultural terrorism. He selected which galleries and museums to bomb, and even where to plant the explosives so they damaged particular pictures. But paintings weren't just targets. For Denaro, they were also bargaining chips. As the bombs were going off, secret negotiations were taking place. Anna Sergi.
There had been some negotiation between the state and the mafiosi of that time to stop the bombing, to try and figure out what to do.
According to mafia witnesses, who later testified in criminal trials related to the bombings, Cosa Nostra made an offer. If the state released high-ranking mafiosi from jail, they would not only stop blowing up museums, they would also return stolen paintings. Filia Allam again.
They're trying to see whether they can use them to gain advantage or to blackmail the state. Clearly, there is a strategy there of using these artifacts to their benefit, to their safety, to their protection.
And the man in charge of deciding which pieces to offer up? Matteo Messina Denaro. So what does all this have to do with William Verres and his search for the stolen Caravaggio? Thanks to Lorenzo and his photos, Verres now has the clearest evidence yet the mafia didn't sell the painting in the 1960s or 1970s. Instead, they moved it within Sicily in the 1990s to avoid the state's crackdown. And if Denaro was the guy in charge of the mafia's art strategy and the person who controlled its hoard of stolen art, he probably knows where it is. Here's Arthur Brand, the art investigator.
We all suspect that the Caravaggio, if it still exists, it's in the hands of Matteo Denaro. The least thing I can say, which I'm 100% sure, is that Matteo asked around, where is that stupid fucking painting? I want it.
There's just one problem. Right around the time he bombed the Uffizi, Denaro disappeared. We'll be back after this short break. Denaro went dark in June 1993, a few weeks after the Uffizi blast. And however hard the Italian police searched, he was always one step ahead. He moved from house to house with his girlfriend, who gave birth to a daughter in hiding. From time to time, the police found traces of Denaro, love letters between him and one of his many women, secret messages called pizzini in Italian, written on small scraps of paper. Meanwhile, his disappearance didn't stop prosecutors. He was tried in absentia for his role in the bombings, found guilty and given multiple life sentences. But they could never catch him.
Being on the run takes a certain amount of skill, but also a certain amount of complicity.
Filia Allam again.
You have a whole collaborative network that is going to help and support you avoid arrest, avoid the police. It's not only having access to certain apartments, certain contacts that are going to provide you with transport, that are going to be able to give you food. It's also about having the intelligence to know how and when to move.
Denaro's network of protectors was vast. Italian police estimate that several thousand people helped him stay under the radar. Lawyers and accountants kept his money invisible. Farmers and landowners gave him secluded places to stay. Business people ran front companies for him in all sorts of industries, from cement and olive oil to wind energy and waste management. And, of course, art. It was a business empire worth billions of dollars.
Matteo Messina Denaro is interesting because he seems to have this double identity. On the one hand, he is considered to have been very violent, but then went underground, disappeared, and during that time, he kind of became older and started to be much more of a sophisticated businessman.
With that kind of money, you can afford to buy protection. But it wasn't just about the money. People protected Denaro because they liked him. Here's Anna Sergi again.
Messina Denaro was a very attractive character, in a sense. He was very charismatic, so people did like him, people who knew him. And he believed to be sort of a god.
Denaro cultivated his image carefully, even as he remained in the shadows. He was rarely photographed, but the few shots that emerged showed him in flashy suits and aviator sunglasses, living the high life.
He was a man who liked luxury. He spent money for watches, for clothing, for beautiful things.
The lavish lifestyle was all part of his personal branding. He wanted to be seen as invincible. He was free, and he was flaunting it. His nickname, Diabolic, was another part of his brand building. He took it from a popular Italian comic book character, a ruthless thief motivated by old-fashioned virtues like honor and loyalty. This is how Denaro wanted to be seen, as the classic anti-hero. Just as he recognized the symbolism of art in Italy, he created a symbol out of himself. Denaro was still a mafia kingpin who controlled much of Sicily. As long as he was untouchable, so was Cosa Nostra. And it wasn't just ordinary Sicilians who helped him either. He had friends right at the heart of the Italian government.
His main protector was a former junior justice minister, someone who served in parliament under Silvio Berlusconi. So we are talking about someone particularly high up.
Italy had declared war against Matteo Messina Denaro. But for decades, individuals within the Italian state were giving tip-offs about police investigations, telling him where and when to move. As one Italian journalist put it, mafiosi are in parliament, mafiosi are sometimes ministers, mafiosi are bankers, mafiosi are those who are at the top of the nation right now. This same journalist was later assassinated by the mafia. So Denaro had plenty of help. Even William Verres seems to have heard about where to find Denaro.
As my friend said, we could have had a coffee with him on a Sunday morning at 10 o'clock in Castelvetrano any time we would have wished. If my friend knew about this, then hundreds, if not thousands of people knew where he was. That tells you everything you want to know about how Italy works.
So, if people in Verres' network were also in Denaro's network, does that mean there's a way to get to him? Well, maybe, but it's easier said than done.
Now, of course, with someone like that, you'd be extremely deferential, and it's quite possible that even the cafe itself, you'd be vetted before being allowed even just to nod to him, and you'd probably have to have somebody as an intermediary to actually clear you.
Arthur Brand agrees that it's possible.
You have to know the right people, but you have to convince them that it's worth their time. But I would love to talk with Matteo Denaro about...
But just as Verres and Brand figure out how to access the Mafia Cafe, Denaro surfaces.
Italy's most wanted mafia boss has finally been captured after spending decades on the run, ending one of Europe's longest manhunts.
One morning, in January 2023, just a few weeks after Verres and I met Lorenzo, a thin, pale man dressed in an expensive brown suede coat turned up at a clinic in Palermo. He was there for an appointment with his doctor, but as he was waiting in line at the reception desk, he was approached by heavily armed police. They asked him to identify himself, and, calmly as you like, he told them. His name was Matteo Messina Denaro.
Military police led away Italy's #1 fugitive after arresting the mafia boss at a hospital in Sicily. 60-year-old godfather Matteo Messina Denaro was reportedly being treated for colon cancer at this clinic under a false name and did not put up a fight when he was found.
Denaro's arrest shocked the world. For 30 years, he was invisible. And suddenly, here he was, being led away from a cancer clinic in handcuffs. It was the result of meticulous police work, and it all started with an armchair. About a year before they found Denaro, the Italian police raided the house of his sister, Rosalia. Anna Sergi again.
They found the so-called pizzini, one of the two small pieces of paper where Matteo Messina Denaro wrote small messages, notes. They found this note, by the way, inside of an armchair. And in this specific case, what was in it was a very cryptic message, and it contained budgets, and within this budget, some indication of medical expenses. And that amount of medical expense could have been only for a member of the family. So it was either a very close member of the family or himself.
The message indicated that the bills were for cancer treatment, and this lined up with rumours the police had picked up from wiretaps and informants that maybe Denaro was sick. They began to scour Italy's health service records, looking for people in that area of Sicily who roughly matched Denaro's age and description, and who were receiving long-term treatment. Anyone who matched the profile was put under surveillance. Eventually, they zeroed in on one man. And as they tracked his cell phone to monitor his movements, they noticed something very strange about this guy. he didn't seem to be going to his appointments.
During some of the visits that this guy was supposed to make to the clinic, they realized that the phone of this guy never moved. So it was either someone else receiving the treatment or he wasn't going to the treatment.
It turned out that Denaro was receiving chemotherapy under this other person's name. Now, on its face, this seems like a huge victory for the Italian police. After 3 decades, they finally had their man. Here's Filia Allam.
He represented a defeat of the Italian state, right? Because they just couldn't catch him. And he'd managed to use a lot of different ways to outsmart the Italian state.
But there's also another way to look at it. That getting arrested was Denaro's final act of revenge. Think about it. He'd been on the run for 30 years, and then he got cancer. By the time of his arrest, he probably knew it was terminal. So he had 2 choices. He could die in hiding, receiving palliative care under a false name, or he could go out with a bang, spend his last 6 months in hospital, doing his final lap openly as a mafia hero, and make the Italian state foot the bill.
The fact that Matteo Messina Denaro says that you only caught me because I had cancer, that's quite a strong statement. Telling the state that, basically it's not the state who got him, it was his cancer. Again, big, strong message about the invincibility of Cosa Nostra.
This is certainly how William Verres sees it. He was in Sicily when Denaro was taken into custody.
I was sitting in bed that morning when suddenly it flashed across the screen that he'd been arrested. Then later on that day when I was filling up the car at a gas station, there was the banter going between the people in the shop of the garage, and of course everybody's saying that he gave himself up.
The notorious Italian mafia boss Matteo Messina Denaro has died in custody at the age of 61. He was often described as the last godfather of the Sicilian mafia.
Denaro passed away in a prison hospital in September 2023. He was making friends to the end. While he was dying, he took several smiling selfies with medical staff. Like a true mafioso, he never talked. After his arrest, 2 magistrates came to the prison to interview him. They asked him if he was a member of the mafia. No. They asked him if he knew anything about the mafia. Only from the newspapers. They asked him if he had ever murdered anyone. No. But there was one thing he did admit. In fact, he talked about it in great detail. You see, he loved ancient art. And when he was younger, he made a living by selling objects found near his home. He said he once found a jar full of ancient coins and sold them to dealers all over the world. And who knows, maybe one of them passed through the hands of a simple coin dealer in North London, one William Verres. But during this interview with the magistrates, the Caravaggio never came up. At least as far as we know. The magistrates released a transcript of their conversation with Denaro, and large chunks of it were redacted.
Well, let's get to the latest on this. Mark Lowen, our correspondent, is in Rome for us.
When he was arrested, he boasted that he would not divulge any information, he had no regrets at all. So many will fear, actually, that he will take some of those biggest mafia secrets to his grave.
So, is that it? Has the mystery of the Caravaggio died with Matteo Messina Denaro? Verres still holds out hope that he can crack it. But if he's learnt one thing, it's that the stakes are still really high. Remember Lorenzo, the guy from Belgium we met at the start of this episode? Verres didn't just introduce him to me. Verres also introduced Lorenzo to the Italian anti-mafia police. They had a meeting to discuss the Caravaggio, how much Lorenzo knew about it, what it might take for him to lead them to it.
They said anything that the state can give you would have to be result-based.
During the meeting, Lorenzo laid out his terms. It was the Denaro playbook all over again, from those state mafia negotiations back in the 1990s. Lorenzo wanted favours for mafia prisoners.
The authorities could probably call up a prison governor and say, right, give him another hour in the courtyard, or give him another packet of cigarettes or another...
The mafia prisoners he was talking about were being held under what Italy calls the hard prison regime. Lifers who are kept in perpetual solitary confinement, with no visits, no contact with other prisoners, no exercise, no interaction with the outside world, and no prospect of appeal. Lorenzo wanted these conditions relaxed. But the authorities weren't prepared to play ball.
He needed, in a sense, the favours done before he gave them the information, and that would never happen. And I realised at that point it was all pie in the sky.
So after all this time, the mafia are still trying to use the painting to exert their influence. And maybe, in the end, that's the whole point. When the mafia stole the Caravaggio back in 1969, the goal was to make money. But over 50 years later, they're more interested in the mystery they've created around it.
One of the big things about the Sicilian mafia is the idea of myths, is the idea of meanings, symbols, messages.
The mafia isn't powerful simply because it amasses money, buys politicians, and wipes out its enemies. It's powerful because it's elusive. Just look at Denaro, the mafia boss on the run for 30 years. He was Italy's public enemy number one. Every police officer in the country was on the lookout for him. And yet he was nowhere to be seen. In the end, his disappearance was proof of his enduring influence over the Italian state. Catch me if you can, but you can't. Perhaps, for the mafia, the Caravaggio is the same kind of symbol. As long as the canvas is missing, they're still around. Remember those photos at the start of this episode? The ones Lorenzo sent to Verez on WhatsApp? I think that's why he sent them, to suggest that despite Italy's campaigns to root out the mafia's influence, they're still holding the Caravaggio hostage, and someone, somewhere, knows where it is.
To think that someone in Cosa Nostra knows where the Caravaggio is, that's important, right? It's this mystery that no one knows. But if someone in Cosa Nostra knows, then that makes Cosa Nostra more important.
When Denaro was arrested, many Italians hoped it might mark the end of Cosa Nostra's hold over Sicily. For Filia Allam, that only makes the Caravaggio more significant for the mafia's future.
It makes it different from this organisation that's declining. To think that, somewhere somebody will be able to produce this wonderful piece of artwork.
After the news broke that Denaro had died, I called William Verez. The mafioso who probably knew more about the painting than anybody else was gone. And I wanted to know how Verez felt about the state of the search.
Because so far we haven't achieved anything virtually, other than an embarrassment.
The last few months had left him feeling bruised. He had put his faith in Arthur Brand, the world's most famous art detective. Together they had tried to recover stolen paintings. They'd taken risks by paying criminals as they hunted for stolen art. But the closest they had come was a cheap fake. They'd been played. But despite everything, Verez was still possessed by the idea of finding the Caravaggio and what it would mean. He thought back to his first meeting with those 3 Italian anti-mafia agents, the ones who had accepted his offer to help search for the painting.
The one thing I can tell you is that the Caravaggio represents a great symbol of the strength of crime. In other words, it would be a great symbol of the victory of the forces of order over that of the mafia. The longest running fugitive was not Messina Denaro at 30 years. It's Caravaggio at 52 years and counting.
For now, it looks like the criminals have won again. And in a way, Verez is one of the victims. A few days after we spoke, he was due back in court in Sicily. He hasn't found the paintings he was looking for, and so far he hasn't received any favours. For now, he has to fight his case the old-fashioned way, in the dock. As we release this podcast, his trial is ongoing.
So I would say it's all there to be proved.
In the meantime, there's business to attend to, coins to be bought and sold. Verez has got to get to a meeting.
But now, look, while we're blathering on here, I've got to dash back to Mayfair, so we can carry this on later on.
Okay.
But I'll have to cut out now.
Once a dealer, always a dealer. This has been The Professor, with me, Simon Willis. This podcast is written and co-created by me. The show is produced by Brazen in partnership with PRX. Rubini Bamashekar is managing producer. Susie Armitage is our story editor, and Lucy Woods is our associate producer and fact-checker. Mixing and sound design by Claire Urban. Executive producers for Brazen are Bradley Hope and Tom Wright. At Brazen, Mariangel Gonzalez is our project manager. Megan Dean is our network manager. Francesca Gilardi Quadriocurcio is Italian research assistant and podcast strategist. Arnav Benaikia and Noor Abdel Latif are assistant strategists. Ryan Ho is the series creative director. Cover art designed by Julian Pradia. Our interpreters are Daria Bocchetti and Lawrence Mogridge. Voiceover translation from Elio Pagano. For more information on this podcast and other podcasts from Brazen, go to our website, brazen.fm.